What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be taking a deep dive into each of the main card fights taking place this weekend at UFC Fight Night Gamrot versus Tsarukyan. We're going to be breaking these fights down from a betting perspective, and I hope you're going to be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions and maybe even earn some extra cash, or maybe even save yourself some money if we bring up some things that you didn't otherwise think about. And if you like these breakdown videos and you'd like to watch videos for all the prelim matchups on this card, head on over to my website MMABettingTips.com. You can see it in the background here. You can find a link to it in the description below. On there you'll find breakdown videos for every single fight on every single UFC card, including the prelims. On there you'll also find a wide range of bets, everything from over-under bets, prop bets, money line bets, pretty much every type of bet you can think of on MMA. Most of them are profitable, and on top of that you can also check out our VIP chat room. You'll find me in there like 8 to 10 hours a day, so if you want to talk about any future fights, betting on other sports, betting strategies, you can find me in there most of the time, as well as a lot of other members in the community. So that is that out the way. And before we get into breaking down the first fight that I want to talk about, just want to remind you guys that this is not financial advice. It's very important to gamble responsibly. Everything in this video is for entertainment purposes only, and please do your own research if you are thinking of placing any bets this weekend. I always like to make it really clear that betting on any sport and being profitable is one of the hardest things you can do. They say Vegas wasn't built on winners. It is very true. And so even though I've been earning a living betting on MMA for a long time now, it takes an unbelievable amount of work to be profitable betting on any sport, and I'm literally chained at my desk for most of the week researching fights to enable me to grind out any kind of profit. It really does take a lot of work to be profitable betting on MMA. So do your own research. Understand it is very difficult to make money betting on MMA, but I've been doing this for a long time. I've got a lot of experience betting MMA. I've been making money betting on MMA for a long time. And so all the information that I'm going to be sharing with you in this video is backed up by hours and hours and hours of research and over a decade of experience. Been doing this for 15 years now. So I hope you found the information, I hope you find the information in this video very useful. Also want to let you guys know, if this video receives 200 likes, this Friday I will be doing a live stream, over-under live stream, where I go through every single fight on this card and I talk about each one of those fights from an over-under betting perspective to see if we can dig up bets on the fight to go the distance or not. My profitability on this kind of bet is pretty good, so if you would like me to do that video, all you need to do, hit the like button below. Please also as well, this is like I just want to pay you guys back, right, for hitting the like button. Help boost the video in the YouTube search rankings is really helpful. So I want to do these live streams to pay you guys back. But if you could do me a favor and like the video now pretty quickly, because what happens is we always hit the like target, but it's way too late. I think that for the last video we hit the 200 like target on the day of the fight, which meant even though I got the video out, it was literally just a few hours before the event started, and with different time zones and shit, it meant obviously not everyone can get a chance to watch that video. So let's try and hit the target by Friday. I could do the live stream for the over-unders Friday night, and everyone's got enough time to kind of watch it and see what they think of it, man. So yeah, do me that favor if you can. If not, don't worry, we'll bang it out on Saturday, no problem. But I really appreciate you hitting the like button anyway. And yeah, leave a comment. Let me know what you think about these breakdowns. Subscribe if you haven't already. I know every YouTuber says this shit. It makes a big fucking difference. It makes a big difference. If I don't say, hey guys, please hit the like button, does it get anywhere near as much likes as when I bring it up? And then it's a big factor in the YouTube ranking, man. It helps a lot. So anyway, nice one. Enough of that shit. Let's talk about the first fight that I want to get into in today's video, which is going to be Arman Tsarukyan against Mateusz Gamrot. An excellent main event here, two rising stars in the UFC's lightweight division, and some great matchmaking from the UFC to pit two guys up and coming in the lightweight division up against one another, so we can see which guy is the real deal, which one of these guys is ready to take that next step towards the title picture. And whoever wins this is going to be taking a huge step towards that top 5 ranking in the UFC's lightweight division, especially considering a lot of the guys at the top of the UFC's lightweight division are getting pretty old for lightweight, you know, all approaching kind of like their mid-30s. So Gamrot, Tsarukyan, great job from the UFC. Brilliant fight this. And from a betting perspective, I also think it's pretty good. I have placed quite a large bet on Tsarukyan this week. I do think he's a really good bet. Unfortunately, his odds have declined a lot from the time that I bet him. So I never do the hard sales pitch. I don't advertise my website, promote my website, market my website. I don't really push my website hard on anyone. But this is one of the benefits of being a member of the website. I bet Tsarukyan late last week when his odds were around 1.44 minus 227. And obviously since you're betting him in that odds range late last week, you can see his odds have been consistently declining all the way down to about average of 1.36 now. So that's one of the benefits of joining the website, joining the community. Obviously it's a lot of work to produce a YouTube video, so I could just share bets very quickly through the website. Like, literally takes a second. If I was going to produce a whole video to share a bet, it would take a lot more time. So obviously you get bets and information from me way faster if you're a member of the website. But to be fair, it's one of those things where even though the odds have declined a lot on Tsarukyan, I still think he's a pretty good bet at these odds. You're not getting as good of a risk to reward ratio as you would have last week, but I don't think it's a deal breaker for all the reasons that I'll explain in this video. So let's start off by taking a look at the odds. Like I say, I have bet Tsarukyan at better odds than this, but I'm going to break this fight down based on what his odds are right now, because obviously those are the odds that you guys are going to be working with. So the average odds available on Tsarukyan right now are about 1.36, which is minus 278 for an implied probability of 74%. If we take a look at the odds on Gamrot, he is around about an average of 3.40, which is going to be plus 240 for an implied probability of 29%. So Tsarukyan is a very big favourite, and if you've been watching my content for a while, you'll know that I don't like betting big favourites in MMA. It is very, very rare that you will see me bet big favourites in MMA, because ultimately MMA is such a chaotic, such an unpredictable sport that irrespective of how two guys match up from a stylistic point of view, there are a lot of different ways that a fighter can lose, which obviously has an impact on how you cap their chances of winning, what probability you give them of winning. So in the case of Tsarukyan, if we look at his odds, current average odds of 1.36, which is minus 278, that gives him an implied probability of 74%. So in order to get any value betting Tsarukyan this weekend, you've got to give him a better than 74% chance of winning, which isn't an easy thing to do in a sport as chaotic as MMA. Last week, when we broke down the fights between Calvin Kattar and Josh Emmett, or Albert Duraev and Joaquin Buckley, we were saying that, look, it's very likely that Kattar and Duraev win, but then we spoke about the ways in which Buckley and Emmett could potentially make those fights close, competitive, and cause an upset. And what happened? Both Kattar and Duraev lost. And so you've got to be really careful betting big favourites in MMA, because in order to find value in fighters in this odds range, they have to have virtually no way to lose. And in such a chaotic sport like MMA, that's very rarely the case, because again, irrespective of how guys match up from a stylistic point of view, there are so many ways they can lose. Maybe they get disqualified, maybe they get injured in the fight, maybe they go into the fight with an injury, right? We saw Rakic a few weeks back go into the fight, with an injured knee, and then he injured his knee again in the fight, right? We see fighters have bad weight cuts, which affects their performance. Sometimes they're crippled by performance anxiety. Sometimes they get a sickness or something, during fight week and decide to compete anyway. So, on top of all that, you get your random Hail Mary submissions, flash KOs, and MMA is an absolute minefield. So there are so many ways that fighters can lose, irrespective of, how they match up with their opponent, that it is often very difficult to find value in fighters as big favourites. But every once in a while, and this is very rare, but every once in a while, we do get a stylistic matchup between two guys where one fighter has an advantage over their opponent pretty much everywhere. And I believe this is one of those fights. I believe Tsarukyan is essentially just a better version of Gamrot, and I think he's the total package. I think Tsarukyan's got the better chin, the better cardio, the better striking, the better grappling, the better everything. When I research both these guys and I look at their strengths and weaknesses, there's literally nothing Gamrot does better than Tsarukyan. And so in matchups like that, which are very rare, you can start to consider betting on the big favourite, because realistically, the only way that that fighter that's the big favourite is going to lose is through the chaotic, the chaotic nature of MMA, all the things we've just spoken about, like injuries and DQs and flash KOs and stuff. But you look at the odds on Tsarukyan, implied probability is 74%. Would you, bundle all those chaotic, factors together and say they account for a 24% chance of losing? Probably not. Maybe 10%, 15%, which means that you can still find value on guys like Tsarukyan, in this implied probability odds range, even though it's very rare and reserved for guys who have pretty much every advantage over their opponent that you could possibly think of. Now, before we talk about how these two guys match up from a stylistic point of view and exactly why this is such a good fight for Tsarukyan, what I want to do is use an example of how MMA odds are quite often very off to illustrate how much value there is on Tsarukyan. So a few weeks ago, we broke down the fight between Valentina Shevchenko and Taylor Santos. And Valentina Shevchenko was a huge favourite. She was around 1.14, which is minus 714, for an implied probability of 88%. And when we researched that fight and we broke it down, we said, look, Valentina Shevchenko is very likely to win this fight. She's likely to win the fight a huge percentage of the time. But based on our research, we identified that Taylor Santos would likely have an advantage if the fight went to the ground, which gave her a path to victory, and it gave her an advantage over Shevchenko and, a realistic chance of winning the fight. With Santos's advantages on the ground, it was impossible to give Shevchenko a better than 88% chance of winning, which you would have needed to do in order to get any value on Shevchenko. And so we bet Santos. Ultimately, she lost the fight. But it's clear that Santos was the stronger side to be on. She was a 5.5 plus 450 underdog. And in a fight that was essentially razor close, right? It ended in a split decision. It was very much a 50-50 fight. Could have gone either way. We had an enormous amount of value over the bookies when we bet Santos. And look, value doesn't pay the mortgage. Value doesn't pay the bills. But when you find that big of a margin over the betting sites and you consistently do it over a long period of time, you're going to be profitable. It is inevitable. And had Santos and Shevchenko not had that clash of heads in that fourth round, I think Santos would have gone on to win that fight, because the clash of heads definitely affected her performance. So why am I bringing this fight up now? Well, I'm bringing this fight up because Shevchenko is a far bigger favourite than Tsarukyan is. The odds on Shevchenko carried an implied probability of 88%. The odds on Tsarukyan carry an implied probability of 74%, which would suggest Shevchenko had a far better chance of beating Taylor Santos than Tsarukyan has of beating Gamrot. But we know that's not the case, because we've researched both fights in the exact same way. And in the case of Shevchenko, we've identified Taylor Santos will have a reasonably good advantage if the fight goes to the ground. And we saw that. She took Shevchenko down pretty easily for the most part. Won most scrambles, had long periods of top control and back control. She had Shevchenko in a lot of trouble in that fight. Whereas if you look at Tsarukyan versus Gamrot, with how they match up stylistically, there's actually nothing that Gamrot does better than Tsarukyan. He has no advantages over Tsarukyan at all. Sure, Gamrot can win, but he can only really win through the randomness of MMA, where maybe he scores a flash knockout or a crazy submission, or Tsarukyan comes in with an illness or injured or some way which affects his performance. But if both guys show up and perform to their full potential, the probability of Gamrot winning is so slim. And yet, Tsarukyan's odds are a lot better than Shevchenko's odds. In reality, Shevchenko probably should have been in that 1.40 minus 250 range that Tsarukyan is now in, and Tsarukyan should have probably been at these odds, because like I say, if we're saying like the randomness of MMA, the flash KOs, the disqualifications, the injuries, all that stuff accounts for maybe a 10 to 15% chance of the underdog causing an upset in a matchup such as this. I feel that the odds are very off here. If I was personally capping this fight, I would cap Tsarukyan at a 1.20 minus 500 to 1.25 minus 400 favourite, which means even at odds of 1.36, you're still getting a decent value of margin over the bookie. And obviously, now is the time where I explain why, right? Let's get into the roots of this fight, really break it down on a deep level from a technical point of view. Well, first of all, I suppose we should talk about perhaps the reason why there's a lot of value on Tsarukyan in this matchup. And I think a big part of it is the popularity of Mateusz Gamrot. The UFC is really unique in many ways because it's one of the very few sports where popularity and charisma and the styles of fighters can have a real influence on the odds. In many ways, it's a little bit like the WWE, where people, MMA fans, they are fans of certain fighters, they like certain fighters more than others, and this popularity has an influence on the odds. Gamrot is a very popular fighter in Poland. A lot of people think he is very, very good. So in that way, whenever you're dealing with a guy like Gamrot, you can see situations where the odds are a little off. I've personally felt that the odds were off on Gamrot's fights in all of his fights in the UFC so far, and this Tsarukyan one is no different. You think about the Conor McGregors or the Sean O'Malley's, or more recently, fighters like Paddy Pimblett, who are very, very popular. All these fighters tend to be pretty big favourites in all of their matchups, but sometimes their skill set and how they match up against their opponents do not reflect the true nature of their probability of winning. And so Gamrot is very much a guy that falls into that sort of category of a fighter that is ultra popular, like a Conor, like a Paddy, like a Sean O'Malley. But you've really got to consider whether their probability of winning in the odds truly reflects their real probability of winning a fight based on how they match up with their opponents stylistically. And obviously, Gamrot isn't a huge star in the UFC. He's pretty popular, but he's not he doesn't have a crazy exciting style. And it's not like he's one of the big up and coming rising stars in the UFC. A lot of hardcore UFC fans like him. But, amongst casual fans, he's not like a giant star like a Sean O'Malley or a Tai Tuivasa or something like that. With Gamrot, though, I do feel there's something else at play which could be having an influence on the odds. And we do see this happen a lot in the UFC. And that's where MMA fans in general and the people that bet on MMA don't really understand the level that a fighter is at and what they're capable of. They've kind of misjudged their overall skill set, and they think the particular fighter, Gamrot in this instance, is better than they actually are. And I see this happen so often. I spend so much time researching MMA fights that, for the most part, I'm pretty good at assessing what a fighter's level of ability is. And so I do pretty well betting against irrational hype. We see situations where, you remember back a few years when Johnny Walker was being talked about as the guy that could beat John Jones. And then, if you just spend a little bit of time looking at his fights before he came to the UFC, you'd see he was a pretty low-level guy. How quickly we saw a guy like Volkan Oezdemir fast-tracked into a title shot against Daniel Cormier because of all the hype behind him. And we saw how that ended. Watching a little bit of footage on Oezdemir from earlier in his career would have shown you he's not great. Other examples, Miranda Maverick, people were very high on her when she first came into the UFC. But if you would have looked at her fights, from before she came to the UFC, you would have seen she was really low level on the ground. But then it wasn't until she fought Erin Blanchfield where people actually woke up and saw that issue in her skill set. And so Gamrot has got tons of issues in his skill set, but not many of his past opponents have been able to make him pay for them. So while these weaknesses have existed throughout his entire career, just hasn't faced the correct kind of opponents to exploit them yet. But I think Tsarukyan is the guy that is going to exploit them. And I think a big reason why guys like Gamrot and their weaknesses kind of fly under the radar for a bit is that people are very influenced by results on paper. MMA record of 20-1 is extremely impressive, especially considering Gamrot fought at a good level before he came to the UFC. KSW is an excellent promotion. He was the poster boy. He was a KSW champion for a while. So I understand why people are high on this guy. And he is very good. He's a solid UFC lightweight. He's going to have a good career in the UFC lightweight division. He's doing all the right things, training full-time at American Top Team. And, he's going to be improving at a rapid rate. And he's going to have a very, very good career as a UFC fighter. However, there are levels to this game. And Arman Tsarukyan is a special fighter. I think this guy is elite. I think he's capable of being a world champion in the future. I think he's capable of, being a perennial top 5 UFC lightweight from now until, the time that he's too old to perform with the young, hungry bulls anymore. And I just don't see Gamrot at that level for all the reasons that I'll do my best to explain now. So one of the fundamental reasons why Tsarukyan should win a very, very high percentage of the time this weekend is because both these guys are primarily grapplers, but there are levels to this game, and Tsarukyan is levels and levels and levels and levels and levels above Gamrot when it comes to grappling. Levels, like night and day levels, like not even close. So what you've got here is two grapplers coming into a contest where there's probably going to be a lot of grappling, and one grappler in the case of Gamrot will not be able to compete with the level of grappling that Tsarukyan is going to be bringing to the table. One of the huge problems that has been an issue for Gamrot throughout his career, and I say issue like loosely because clearly it hasn't been an issue because he's only ever lost one fight, but I promise you, if you go back and you watch a lot of Gamrot's fights, you will see this weakness in his skill set. And that's that his gas tank just isn't very good, which you wouldn't, and this is maybe where people are assessing his skill set incorrectly, because you wouldn't expect a guy with a record as great as Gamrot, 20-1, with lots of his fights going the distance as well, especially in KSW. You wouldn't expect a guy like Gamrot to have any gas tank issues, but he really does. And I if you're interested in betting this fight this weekend, I implore you to go do some of your own research on Gamrot. Look at how flat he looks in the second half of fights. But anyway, that's a big issue in this matchup for Gamrot, because Arman Tsarukyan is one of these guys that can grapple hard, fight at an extremely high pace for however long the fight goes. His gas tank's absolutely phenomenal. We saw him go the distance in a crazy fast-paced fight against Islam Makhachev, who I consider to be personally one of the best MMA grapplers I've ever seen. I think he's going to be a very, very dominant UFC lightweight champion in the near future. But Tsarukyan matched Makhachev every single step of the way, scrambled hard with him for 15 minutes, was difficult to control over those 15 minutes. He really tested Makhachev in that fight, and that just speaks to how good Tsarukyan actually is. Didn't slow down at all. Went 15 hard minutes with Makhachev, who we know is an absolutely phenomenal grappler. Now, when it comes to Gamrot, his gas tank issues have a big impact on his fighting style, because Gamrot is actually a good grappler. Really good offensive wrestling, great timing on his takedowns, good double legs, good single legs. He's a very, very good offensive wrestler. But Gamrot's problem is that he doesn't have the cardio to grapple hard for very long. So what you usually see from Gamrot is grappling in sprints. So he'll shoot in with single legs, double legs, take his opponents to the ground. Then once that grappling sequence is played out and his opponent works their way back up to their feet, you'll see a long period of inactivity from Gamrot, where he needs to slow his heart rate down, control his breathing, and take a little bit of a break before launching his next attack. This means that Gamrot is stuck in this awkward position where if he utilizes his biggest strength, which is his grappling, he's going to accelerate the rate at which he slows down, because grappling is what gets him tired. But then if he doesn't grapple, you get long periods of inactivity in his fights where he doesn't do a lot, where he's trying to avoid engaging so that he can recharge his batteries ready for the next attack. So Gamrot's in this really awkward position where he can't do too much of the thing that he's great at, because it'll get him into trouble further down the line. So Gamrot's always playing this game where he's got to focus so much energy and so much thought on pacing himself because he can't go hard for 15 minutes. Because if he goes hard for 15 minutes, he's going to be absolutely gassed out of his mind by the third round. So straight away, this gives Tsarukyan a huge advantage in this matchup, because Tsarukyan, like we said in the example of the Makhachev fight, he can go hard for 15 minutes without slowing down. Tsarukyan's one of these guys that can sprint and sprint and sprint, and his style, his sharpness, it's not really going to dip that much. Of course he's going to get tired as the fight wears on. It's normal. But this guy can go hard on a level that Gamrot cannot compete with. So that makes this a very difficult fight, both standing up and on the ground for Gamrot, because no matter what Gamrot does, he's not going to be able to outpace Tsarukyan, or he's not going to be able to outwork Tsarukyan. He's not going to be able to keep up with the pace that Tsarukyan sets. So fundamentally, cardio has a big impact on every single range in which this fight could take place. So we've said both these guys are primarily grapplers. Now, if the fight stays standing, which I don't expect it to, I think we're going to see a lot of grappling in this fight. But in terms of striking, early on, I think Gamrot and Tsarukyan is going to be pretty competitive in the stand-up exchanges. Both these guys are primarily grapplers. Their striking more so serves to set up their takedowns and defend themselves. Neither guy is particularly great offensively. But what I think you will see from these two is very competitive striking exchanges early on. But Gamrot is one of these guys that does become sloppy and flat-footed pretty early into his fights. So after sort of 6, 7, 8 minutes, if Gamrot's past fights are anything to go by, he should become pretty sloppy, pretty flat-footed by the midway point of round 2. By that point, even though early on, from a technical point of view, Tsarukyan and Gamrot are going to be quite well matched on the feet, by midway through round 2, Tsarukyan's style of striking won't have changed that much because his gas tank's brilliant. So he's still going to be light on his feet. He's still going to be sharp. His hand speed's going to be quick. Still going to be very elusive. Tsarukyan's still going to be looking great on the feet. But midway through round 2, Gamrot is going to be looking sloppy and flat. And when Gamrot gets sloppy and flat, his volume falls off a cliff. He just stops throwing. And on top of that, he also becomes very bad defensively and easy to hit. So while early in this fight, Tsarukyan and Gamrot are going to be pretty well matched on the feet, into that midway part of the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth round, Tsarukyan is going to start to take over and absolutely run away with this fight if it stays on the feet. Now, in terms of grappling, even though Gamrot is a reasonably good grappler, like I say, there's levels to this game, and I think Tsarukyan is going to show the world the gap in levels between these two on the ground. So when it comes to Gamrot's style of grappling, the huge weakness that he has is that for whatever reason, he's just not that strong or physically imposing in grappling positions. Gamrot has great offensive wrestling in the sense that he has excellently timed single leg and double leg takedowns. He's very good at getting his opponents to the ground. Then if you go back and watch Gamrot's fights against Kutateladze, a 38-year-old Scott Holtzman, a 37-year-old Carlos Diego Ferreira, what you'll notice is every time Gamrot gets the takedown, his opponents immediately pop back up to their feet. Virtually immediately. Maybe he can rack up 20, 30, 40 seconds max of top control, but you'll see every time this guy takes someone down, they work their way back up to their feet very, very quickly. And that's because he just doesn't have that kind of crushing tight grappling control, that crushing tight physicality to his grappling. So when he takes guys down, he gives them a lot of space and they immediately pop back up to their feet. So this is where this fight is really problematic for Gamrot, because he's not going to be able to outstrike Tsarukyan over 25 minutes. Sure, he might land a flash KO, but what probability would you give that? Not very high. He's also not going to be able to outgrapple Tsarukyan, because even if he were able to get Tsarukyan down, we've seen in Tsarukyan's fights against Olivier Aubin-Mercier, Davy Ramos and Islam Makhachev, he's incredibly good in the scramble. He's very difficult to hold down. He's very strong. He's very scrambly. He's a nightmare. If Gamrot couldn't hold down Kutateladze, a 38-year-old Holtzman, and a 37-year-old Carlos Diego Ferreira, he hasn't got a fucking chance in hell of holding down Arman Tsarukyan. No way. Not happening. Unless Tsarukyan's injured or something like that, it's not happening. And so this becomes a nightmare stylistic matchup for Gamrot, because while he may be able to get Tsarukyan down because he's a good offensive wrestler, he isn't going to be able to hold him down. And the problem with that is, Gamrot is going to have to exert a lot of energy to compete with Tsarukyan in the scramble and chain wrestle with Tsarukyan, and he's not going to be able to do that without burning himself out very, very quickly and gassing out, because that has been an issue throughout his career, even though his results don't show that on paper, because 20-1 is a very, very impressive MMA record. But like I always say, results don't always tell the whole story. Fights aren't fought on paper, they're fought in the cage. And sometimes you get these fighters that go for a long period of time where they have these big weaknesses in the skill set, but just due to the way the cards fall and the way their matchups are made, they don't face the correct style of opponents to exploit those weaknesses. And we talked about this over the last year when we broke down the fight between Juliana Pena and Amanda Nunes, and we were saying, look, Amanda Nunes has a bad gas tank. She's really struggled in any fight that has ever been remotely competitive in her past. You know, by the end of those fights, she was looking absolutely gassed out of her mind. And we said, look, if Pena can kind of hang in there and make her work, Pena's got a path to victory. We all saw what happened a couple of weeks ago with Valentina Shevchenko. We said, look, Shevchenko isn't great on the ground. You know, we've seen her look a little bit sketchy on the ground at any time she's faced someone that can kind of put her in bad positions on the ground. And then look what Taylor Santos did to her. The exact same thing applies to Gamrot. Very impressive record. Really solid UFC lightweight. Going to have a great career. But his cardio is going to make it very, very difficult for him to keep up with the pace that Tsarukyan is going to set here. And so for that reason, even as a big favourite, I think Tsarukyan is a pretty solid bet. But do your own research. Go watch these fights that I've mentioned. Go see for yourself. Come to your own conclusion. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button if you appreciate that breakdown. Let's now get into the next fight that I want to talk about in this video, which is going to be Neil Magny against Shavkat Rakhmonov. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Rakhmonov is also a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.25, which is minus 400 for an implied probability of 80%. If we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Neil Magny, he's around an average of 4.10, which is going to be plus 310 for an implied probability of 24%. So remember, whenever we're breaking down fights, this is not a discussion on who's more likely to win, you know, who we're picking to win. It's more about which side is the better bet, which gives you the better risk to reward ratio, which side may have more value in the odds. And so you'd have to be a crazy person to pick Neil Magny in this. Shavkat Rakhmonov's obviously looked phenomenal since he came into the UFC, but betting is not about picking who's more likely to win. It's about finding value in bets, and that's what we're going to be focusing on with this breakdown. So let's start off by taking a look at the tail of the tape. Neil Magny is 34 years old, 6'3", with an 80-inch reach. Shavkat Rakhmonov, 27 years old, 6'1", with a 77-inch reach. So straight away, there's some pretty juicy X factors for us to dig into here. The first being the age of both these guys. So Neil Magny is 34 years old. Shavkat Rakhmonov is 27 years old. That means there's a 7-year age gap in this fight. And we know that the younger fighter wins around 65% of the time when there's a 7-year age gap in a fight. Now that doesn't mean you can automatically go out and bet that stat, because obviously the odds on Rakhmonov at 1.25 carry an implied probability of 80%. So you've got to give Rakhmonov a better than 80% chance of winning to find any value here. And so the fact that he's got a 65% chance of winning purely based on that age statistic means he's still a no-go here. We've got to think about some other stuff in this matchup. But age, when it comes to Magny, is a little bit more complex, because you can look at Magny and you can go, okay, he's 34 years old. It's not particularly old for a welterweight. You know, even though he's 35 years old in August, mid-30s for a welterweight is nothing major. But we know that everything in mixed martial arts is nuanced. This is why it's so difficult to make money betting on sports. Everything is nuanced. The devil is in the detail. And the detail here that we need to pay attention to is the fact that Magny has a lot of miles on the clock. He's not your average welterweight in the mid-30s. This guy has put a ton of stress, a ton of trauma on his body. And I believe that has resulted in Magny declining a little bit earlier in his career than you would expect him to. So over the last couple of years, I've noticed Neil Magny's reflexes aren't quite what they used to be. Doesn't move well as he used to. just doesn't see the shots coming like he used to. I think Magny's at the early stages of a moderately paced decline. I think you're going to see Magny decline a lot over the next couple of years. And by the time he's like 35, 36, he's going to look a lot worse than your average 35-year-old, 36-year-old welterweight. The reason being, first of all, he's had an absolute ton of fights. 34 pro fights. It's a lot of fights for a guy that's just 34 years old. That is a huge amount of fights. And it's not like Magny is one of these guys that had, 15, 20 fights before he came to the UFC against a low level of opponent where he wasn't really putting that much damage on his body, that much wear and tear on his body, because he was fighting these low level guys that weren't able to push him, weren't able to test him, weren't able to hurt him. That's not the case with Magny. If we look at his record, we can see that after just 8 fights, after just 8 fights, he was into the UFC, making his debut on The Ultimate Fighter. So what that means is, for the last 10 years, Magny has consistently been competing against some of the best fighters in the world. And obviously, when you're competing against the best fighters in the world, they can hurt you more, they can damage you more, they can, put a lot of wear and tear on your body in the cage. Look at all the guys that Magny has faced throughout his UFC career. Now, I know you're probably not going to be the most familiar with many of these guys if you're kind of new to watching UFC. We've got a lot of guys in their early 20s that watch these videos, and you probably weren't watching UFC back when you were like 12, 13, 14 years old. But let me tell you, man, Magny has been facing a decent level of opponent throughout his entire career in the UFC, really. And for that reason, again, he's taken a lot of damage, put a lot of wear and tear on his body. On top of that, we know Magny is a bit of a decisionator. He doesn't really finish guys, doesn't have that one-shot KO power, not a particularly dangerous submission grappler. And on top of that, he's got a great gas tank, good chin, and he's tough himself. So he doesn't really get finished that often. And for that reason, the vast majority of Magny's fights have gone the distance. And this is super important because, this isn't a guy with 34 pro fights that's got tons of first-round finishes. Most of this guy's fights have gone to a decision, which means he spent longer in the octagon against a higher level of opponent, again, putting more stress on his body, racking up more damage. So Neil Magny has got a lot more miles on the clock than the average 34, 35-year-old. And I always use the example of a car, right? If you've got a 1-year-old car with 100,000 miles on the clock, or a 5-year-old car with 20,000 miles on the clock, the 5-year-old car is probably going to be a lot more reliable than the 1-year-old car with 100,000 miles, because obviously the components, the engine, haven't been put through as much. There's not as much wear and tear on them. When you buy a new car and you get the service book, when do they say to replace parts? It'll say replace spark plugs at 80,000 miles. Replace oil filter after 20,000 miles, right? It's all about the mileage, the wear and tear on those components. Now, I look at fighters in exactly the same way. Magny is at that stage in his career where he is probably going to be declining from fight to fight. And I believe I've seen signs of this over the last couple of years, which is perfectly normal, man. Father Time is undefeated. And this is the trajectory that all fighters go through. Nothing personal with Neil Magny at all. You look at last weekend, we had 3 guys on last week's card competing into their late 30s. You had Tim Means, you had Eddie Wineland, you had Josh Emmett, and you had Court McGee, right? And 3 out of those 4 guys were brutally knocked out. It's a young man's game, so no disrespect to Magny. He's a beast, he's a legend, love the guy. But Father Time's undefeated, and he is in the tail end of his career after a great career with 34 pro fights where he's entertained us over the years, right? Gotta love Neil Magny. But in contrast, Shavkat Rakhmonov, only 15 pro fights, has fought a relatively low level of opponent up until this point in his career. He also hasn't spent that long in the octagon because a lot of his fights have ended very quickly inside the distance. Tons of first and second round finishes. This guy is young, hungry, fresh, and so both these guys on opposite career trajectories. Magny declining and getting worse from fight to fight. Rakhmonov is going to be getting better and better and better from fight to fight. So that's a pretty notable X factor for us to take into consideration here. Another X factor that we need to take into consideration is the size. Magny, 6'3" with an 80-inch reach. Rakhmonov, 6'1" with a 77-inch reach. And this is really interesting because one of the things that has enabled Magny to build such a good career in the UFC is that his size makes him a very tricky opponent for a lot of the guys in the welterweight division. Magny is abnormally long and tall for the welterweight division, so a lot of welterweights, around about average welterweight size, struggle to get inside that length and reach and struggle to get inside on Magny. Magny's got great footwork, great movement, a really good jab, which makes him very elusive and a difficult target to hit. So Neil Magny's size and length is one of his biggest attributes. It's one of the things that makes him such a problem for so many guys in this division. But that is an issue for Magny in this fight, because even though he will be a little bit taller than Rakhmonov and have that 3-inch reach advantage, the size and reach advantage in this fight are not really that notable. Rakhmonov is very long and tall as well. So one of the reasons why Magny's had a lot of success in the past is that he's been able to use his size to cause certain opponents problems, but he's not going to be able to do that against Rakhmonov because both guys are roughly the same size. So straight away, stylistically, start to go lean towards Rakhmonov, where Magny doesn't have that advantage that he would usually have against almost everyone that he would fight in the welterweight division because of how abnormally long and tall he is. So in terms of how these two guys match up stylistically from a striking point of view, it's kind of difficult to gauge how they match up. Rakhmonov is for sure the more technical striker, for sure the more powerful striker, throws a more diverse range of attacks, and I'd even say he's better defensively as well. But Magny is a guy that's got a very unique style, and because we haven't seen Rakhmonov face anyone like Magny, it's tough to gauge how he's going to deal with the footwork and the movement of Magny. We know Magny likes to use his length, use a lot of footwork to bounce around on the outside and chip away at Rakhmonov, and we don't really know how Rakhmonov is going to deal with that. I would imagine he's going to deal with it very well. He's got great kicks, legit one-shot KO power in everything he throws, great technique, really good boxing. And like I said earlier on, I do feel Magny's on a bit of a decline where his reflexes aren't quite what they used to be. And I think that Rakhmonov's going to be able to negate a lot of the jabs, a lot of the volume strikes, a lot of the range-finding kicks that Magny likes to throw with big singular power shots and really crisp combinations that are going to leave a far bigger impression on the judges than Magny's kind of pitter-patter volume strikes. So on the feet, I do give Rakhmonov the advantage. I think Magny's one of these guys that struggles to put his stamp on rounds. You often see Magny lose the first half of fights and then pour it on in the second half of fights when guys start to slow down. If Rakhmonov doesn't slow down, I think Magny's going to have a tough time here. I think Rakhmonov's shots are just going to be more impactful, crisper, more technical, do more damage, and like I say, leave a bigger impression on the judges, which is huge. Now, in terms of grappling, the takedown defense and ground game of Magny have always been his biggest weakness. And from what we've seen of Rakhmonov, he looks like an excellent grappler, which you'd expect from a guy with a combat sambo background. So we haven't seen Rakhmonov face any really good grapplers, but gauging, how Rakhmonov moves and handles himself on the ground and the technique that he's displayed, I think if he wanted to, he could take Magny to Suplex City here and absolutely dominate him on the ground. What we notice in MMA is that there's often a trade-off with every attribute, or not always, but a lot of the time. If one guy has a particular advantage in one thing, that will be offset by a particular weakness, in something else. And what we see with a lot of guys who are abnormally long and tall for the division is that they quite often lack physicality. And when they're very long and lean and skinny and quite weak in the lower body, like Magny is, he's got really skinny legs, they're often very easy to take down as well. And this is a problem that's plagued Magny throughout his entire career. He has a great gas tank, he can fight at a very high pace, he's an absolute cardio machine, but he is quite physically weak, and that's why so many of his fights go the distance. He just doesn't have that power in his hands to deliver that knockout blow. And his takedown offense and ground game is also really bad because he's very easy to kind of move around on the ground and overpower. And so if Rakhmonov were to come into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, I think he would absolutely dominate Neil Magny. You go back and watch Magny's fights against some decent grapplers and they take him down and hold him down very, very easily. And this has been, Magny's biggest weakness, I think, throughout his career. So this is one of those fights where Rakhmonov has an advantage in pretty much every single aspect of MMA. But I don't think this is one of those situations where Magny has no path to victory. Because throughout this breakdown, we've been talking about how Magny's entire skill set throughout his career has been based on his work rate, right? Stays in front of his opponents, forces them to engage, for the entire duration of the fight, and forces them to fight at a very high pace. Magny's gas tank is one of his biggest strengths. And while I don't think Magny is going to be able to make Rakhmonov work hard enough to the point where Rakhmonov will gas, because Rakhmonov has never given us any reason to doubt his gas tank, and these combat sambo guys that come from Kazakhstan usually have pretty good gas tanks. But you know what they say, assumption is the mother of all fuck ups, and you do not want to be making assumptions when you are betting fighters in this odds range. Just like we've spoken about in recent weeks when we've bet big underdog like Taylor Santos, or we're betting on Arman Tsarukyan this week. Whenever you are betting on big favourites, there cannot be any unanswered questions. You have to have every single piece of information you need in order to cap the fight accurately and assess the risk to reward ratio you're getting. If there's any unanswered questions, you cannot bet a fighter in this odds range, because when these odds carry an implied probability of 80%, you have no room for error at all. You've got to win 85 to 90% of these bets in order to be profitable long term, which I'm not going to say is impossible, because nothing's impossible, but it is exceptionally difficult to hit an 85 to 90% win rate on any category of bet. And so if you are ever going to bet fighters in this odds range, you need to be real sure that there's absolutely no path to victory that their opponent has, aside from the usual crazy shit happening, like we've said, in the last fight, disqualifications, flash KOs, injuries, all that kind of stuff. I don't think that's the case with Rakhmonov. Like I said, Rakhmonov hasn't given us any reason to doubt his cardio, and guys from this part of the world usually have very good gas tanks. However, Rakhmonov doesn't have any experience going to decisions. If you look at his record, the vast majority of his fights have ended in round 1 or 2. He's only been past round 2 one time, when he went to round 3 here back in 2018. And so we know Magny's built a career off making his opponents work very hard, keeping up a high pace, dragging his opponents deep into the fight, into that second, into that third round, and then taking over with his work rate and his hustle. I don't think Neil Magny is going to be able to do that. I think Rakhmonov's gas tank's probably going to be too good. I think his skill set is probably going to be too good. But I'm not willing to pay this price to gamble and find out. So for me, this matchup is a pass. I think Rakhmonov wins a very, very, very high percentage of the time. And I think he's got all the skills necessary to go on to be a UFC champion. I think he's brilliant. But at the moment, I feel all of his advantages are very much baked into the odds. And I feel that, his odds just are what they are, right? They reflect the fact that he should win a high percentage of the time, but there's no value there for me. Now, would I go as far as saying this is a dog or pass fight? I probably wouldn't. If you really, really, really want to bet this fight, I would probably still go with Rakhmonov, even though he's a big favourite. I do think he's a potential future UFC champion and he wins a high percentage of the time. At no point researching this fight did any part of me get tempted to bet Neil Magny, which is a sign that it is probably going to be pretty tough for him. So, yeah, I wouldn't say this is dog or pass, but if you do bet Rakhmonov this weekend, I don't think win or lose he's a particularly good bet, because I don't think you're getting any value in the odds, even though he probably will win. So, let's now get into the next fight that I want to talk about in this video, which is going to be Alan Baudot against Josh Parisian. So, if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Baudot is the slight favourite at average odds of about 1.87, which is going to be minus 115 for an implied probability of 53%. If we take a look at the odds on Parisian, he's the slight underdog at average odds of about 1.95, which is going to be minus 105 for an implied probability of 51%. So Baudot is 34 years old, 6'3" with a 79-inch reach, and Parisian is 32 years old, 6'4" with a 79-inch reach. So both guys roughly about the same size, both guys roughly about the same age. Nothing major there to separate them or talk about. So let's focus on these two and how they match up from a stylistic point of view. So both guys are primarily strikers. That's where this fight gets a little bit juicy. So let's first of all focus on how they match up when it comes to grappling. Now both these guys share the same weakness when it comes to grappling. They both have very bad takedown defense, and they're both the kind of fighters that if you do take them down, flatten their shoulders out on the canvas, put them on their back, they're very, very easy to hold down. If you can take either one of these guys down, they don't really know how to work their way back up to their feet or make much of an effort to get back up to their feet. And so for that reason, if you do manage to get one of them down, you tend to be able to rack up a lot of top control and score a lot of points on the ground. Now, out of the two, if I was to try and predict who was more likely to use a little bit of grappling in this fight, it would definitely be Josh Parisian. Now, the smartest approach from both these guys would be to avoid going to the ground, because obviously if you do initiate grappling with your opponent, you could lose a scramble, you could give up a takedown and end up in a bad position yourself, which both these guys need to avoid, right? They both need to treat the ground like lava because of how weak they are off their back. But you very rarely see Baudot try to take his opponents down, whereas Parisian will occasionally try to take his opponents down. So Parisian's more likely to go looking for the takedown here. Having said that, his offensive wrestling's not good, just like Baudot's offensive wrestling isn't good. But if Parisian can get this fight to the ground and he can get into top position, he's going to be able to hold Baudot down and rack up a lot of control. But both these guys are primarily strikers. Neither of them are particularly good offensive wrestlers. They're both weak off their back. So more than likely, we'll see a stand-up fight here. And so let's focus on how these two guys match up when it comes to striking. So they're both heavyweights. They're both very, very different kinds of strikers. Baudot is kind of like that new age heavyweight where he's quite fast, he's quite athletic, he moves pretty well. Obviously, he's a training partner of Tsarukyan. Whereas Parisian is more of your old-fashioned kind of heavyweight. He's quite slow, he's quite heavy, he's quite flat-footed. So two very, very different contrasting styles here. Baudot has got nice technical Muay Thai, so there's a nice diverse range of attacks, a high volume of strikes, very crisp, very technical, very fast for a heavyweight. Parisian's got more of a plodding style where he'll kind of walk you down, chase you around the octagon, pressure you, try and drive you into the cage and beat you up in the clinch. Josh Parisian's got a very ugly, dirty boxing style of striking, whereas Baudot is much more of a Muay Thai technician. So that makes for an interesting stylistic matchup here because out in open kickboxing range, Baudot's likely to have a lot of success. He's likely to be able to chip away at Parisian with his superior technique and kind of pick him apart. But Parisian's a tough dude. He's going to be looking to grab a hold of Baudot, drive him into the clinch, rough him up against the cage. And that might work because in Baudot's past fights, particularly his fight against Rodrigo Nascimento, we have seen him we have seen him slow down. And so what's interesting about these two is cardio is an issue for both of them, where we've seen Baudot gas really bad in his fight against Rodrigo Nascimento. But with Parisian, even though Parisian does get tired as fights go on, when both these guys are gassed, Parisian is way more capable of performing close to his full potential just because he's got the dog in him. He's tenacious, he's dogged, he's tough. And no matter how tired he gets, he's still going to come forward and he's still going to bring the fight to you. Whereas with Baudot, we kind of saw him cave on the ground against Tom Aspinall, and he did kind of cave and throw the towel in against Nascimento as well in his second fight in the UFC. So it is possible that Parisian could break him in this matchup if he just roughs Baudot up and makes this an ugly fight. Having said that, Baudot is one of these guys that does appear to be making big improvements from fight to fight, which could be him reaping the rewards of training with one of the best heavyweights in the world in Tsarukyan. Because in his UFC debut against Tom Aspinall, where he got taken down very, very easily and absolutely dominated on the ground by Aspinall, he looked like an absolute welterweight. He just didn't know what he was doing on the ground and he looked absolutely awful. Then in his second fight in the UFC against Rodrigo Nascimento, he looked phenomenal in round one. He was lighting Nascimento up, striking looked excellent, and he looked like a completely new fighter. And then in round two, very, very quickly out of nowhere, he just burnt himself out, gassed out, and looked awful, and was finished shortly after. And so coming into the Parker Porter fight, based on how Baudot looked against Aspinall and Nascimento, you'd be thinking, well, Parker Porter, despite his appearance, has got a really good gas tank at heavyweight. He's also reasonably well-rounded. He's a decent grappler, decent striker, and there's, no way Baudot is going to be able to keep up with the pace that a hard-working heavyweight like Porter is going to set. But Baudot surprised me. I'm sure he surprised you as well, when he kind of kept up with the pace that Porter set, for the full 3 rounds. I was really surprised by how well he kind of hung in there with Porter, and despite Porter putting him in a few bad positions, didn't cave like he did in his first 2 fights against Nascimento and Aspinall. So his performance against Porter does indicate that he's turning a corner and making big improvements from fight to fight. But the fact that we've seen him look very different in his 3 fights in the UFC up until this point also indicate that he might be a bit inconsistent, because we've seen 3 different versions of him now. So who knows what version of him we're going to get against Parisian. But because his gas tank held up well against Porter, because he looked quite sharp on the feet against Porter, and because Porter is so much better than Josh Parisian, this is one of those fights where I think if Baudot shows up if Baudot shows up this weekend and fights like he did against Porter, probably does pretty well against Parisian and beats him. But if Baudot shows up and fought like he did against Aspinall or Nascimento, I think Parisian kind of dogs it out, roughs him up, makes it an ugly fight, makes it a brawl, and at some point probably wears Baudot down and breaks him. So my lean on this fight, you probably got to go with Baudot, just because I think if both guys show up and perform to their full potential, Baudot is more likely to win. But I can't bet this fight myself, because I do think the fact we've seen 3 different versions of Baudot in his 3 fights in the UFC just makes it really tough to trust him. I do feel he might be a bit inconsistent, whereas Parisian's very consistent, because no matter who he's up against, we get the same version of him every single time. So, depending on, I guess, your risk tolerance and your perspective on MMA, do you want to go with Parisian, the guy who's more consistent but less skilled? Or do you want to go with Baudot, the guy that is less consistent but more skilled? One of those pick your poison fights that could probably go either way, and that's probably why the odds are exactly where they should be on this one, with both guys in that even money odds range and carrying an implied probability of in that 50% range for each of them. So I hope you found that useful. I need to take a drink. God damn, I've been talking non-stop and my mouth, holy shit, is dry. Alright, let's get into the next fight that I want to talk about in this video, which is going to be Christos Giagos against Thiago Moises. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Moises is a pretty big favourite. The average odds are about 1.40, which is minus 250 for an implied probability of 71%. If we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Giagos, he is around an average of 3.10, which is plus 210 for an implied probability of 32%. So Giagos is 32 years old, 5'10", with a 71.5 inch reach, and Moises is 27 years old, 5'9", with a 70.5 inch reach. So nothing too major going on there. Both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size, and no big X factors for us to focus on there. But one big thing that we need to talk about whenever we're breaking down a Christos Giagos fight is that his gas tank is just not good, which is really unfortunate because he's a great fighter. He's got a base in wrestling. He's a really strong wrestler, really good technical wrestler. He's got great chain wrestling. His striking's really good as well. He's an exciting, entertaining fighter. But throughout his UFC career, he's been plagued by having a bad gas tank, which means he can't fight at a high pace for very long before burning himself out and gassing pretty bad. And in the case of Christos Giagos, I don't think it's something he can fix. I don't think we're going to see him show up on Saturday night with a much better gas tank than usual, because Giagos has been in the UFC for a really long time now. He's 32 years old. He first made his debut all the way back in 2014. He's fought so many times in the UFC that if he hasn't improved his gas tank by now, he's probably never going to. And I mean, look at Christos Giagos. He clearly trains very hard. I'm sure his diet's very good. I'm sure he's an absolute beast in the gym. So there's no reason why his gas tank would be as bad as it is. It's got to be like some kind of genetic or DNA issue where some guys just don't have a bad gas tank and a very good gas tank, and unfortunately Giagos is cursed by his cardio. It's always going to hold him back and limit him. Now, because he's so good, you know, from a technical point of view when it comes to striking and grappling, he's been able to hold his own in the UFC and pick up some wins. But I don't think that's going to be the case here. I think this is going to be one of those fights where his gas tank really gets him into a lot of trouble. Now, early on, I think Giagos has actually got an advantage over Thiago Moises everywhere. You know, Moises is quite a low-volume striker, doesn't really throw much. He's also not the best boxer. He's got predominantly a kick-based style of striking, whereas Giagos has got big power in his hands. He moves well, very technical. He throws a nice diverse range of attacks. So when Giagos and Moises are both fresh, I think Giagos is going to outstrike Moises early in this fight. And on the ground, I also think Giagos is going to do really well early. He's a very strong wrestler, good chain wrestling, strong on the ground, good grappler. Whereas Thiago Moises, even though he's a very high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, I think Giagos's wrestling and his ability to dictate where the fight takes place is going to be able to neutralize Moises' Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I'd give Giagos the advantage on the ground early. However, Giagos's gas tank changes the complexion of this fight a lot, because the longer the fight goes, the worse Giagos is going to get, and the longer the fight goes, the better Moises is going to do on the feet and on the ground. And I think it will get to the point in this fight where, even though Giagos is likely to start strong and look really good early, by midway point through round 2, Moises is probably going to start to get the better of the striking exchanges, because Giagos will by that point be tired and sloppy, and also Moises will probably start to get the advantage on the ground when Giagos becomes too tired to defend himself. So this is one of those fights where the odds are probably where they should be. I'm not going to be betting on this matchup. This one's an easy pass for me. Because of Giagos' gas tank, I do think Moises deserves to be a big favourite. Having said that, if you really want to bet this fight, I would probably go with Giagos. I do think this is a dog or pass matchup. I really do not think there is any upside at all in betting Moises in this odds range. And so, yeah, dog or pass, but personally, I don't like betting guys with a bad gas tank, because I prefer to bet on fighters who can fight to their full potential for the entire duration of the matchup, not just 5, 6, 7 minutes, which is the case with Giagos. So that's the reason why I'm passing, but I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's talk about the fight between Nate Maness and Umar Nurmagomedov. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, Nurmagomedov is around about a 1.11 favourite, which is minus 909 for an implied probability of 90%. Even when I say that, it is ridiculous. Nothing against Nurmagomedov, I think he's absolutely brilliant. But whenever I see a fighter in this odds range, I just cringe, because MMA is such a chaotic sport. We've spoken about it in all our breakdown videos, right, where we talk about the ways in which fighters can lose, irrespective of how they match up from a stylistic point of view. Fighters can get disqualified, they can get injured, they can fight injured, they can have bad weight cuts, doctor stoppages off a nasty cut. There's so many ways that fighters can lose. Flash KOs, Hail Mary submissions. So, when I see a fighter capped in this range 90%, I'm like, my God, they've got to have virtually no way to lose, which is very rarely the case in MMA. But obviously, that's how we're looking at this fight from a betting point of view. You'd have to be crazy to think Nate Maness was more likely to win this weekend. But that doesn't mean Nurmagomedov is going to be a good bet, because you've seen the risk to reward ratio that you're getting in the odds just isn't very good. So, tailor the tape time. Nate Maness, 30 years old, 5'10" with a 72-inch reach, and Nurmagomedov, 26 years old, 5'8" with a 69-inch reach. So Nate Maness, decent size and reach advantage there, a little bit taller, a little bit longer, which can only help him. And Nate Maness is absolutely huge for the bantamweight division. At 5'10" with a 72-inch reach, he has a wingspan that you'd usually see in the lightweight division, so he's absolutely huge for a bantamweight. And because of that, I'd expect his weight cut to be pretty brutal. He has fought at featherweight in the past. I've got no idea how he makes the bantamweight limit, but he is an extremely big bantamweight. That is one of the reasons why Maness also has abnormally big power for the division. where we were saying a few moments ago, all the crazy ways in which fights can end and how chaotic MMA is, we're talking about flash KOs being one of the things that you kind of bundle into the chaos of MMA. And Maness increases the probability of him beating anyone by flash KO because he has got abnormally big power in his hands. Big, big, big power puncher. And I think that comes from the fact that he's so big for bantamweight. He carries the power into the bantamweight division from someone in a much heavier weight class. We know size matters in MMA, and Nate Maness, big power in his hands, hits abnormally hard for someone in this division. But, like Chael Sonnen said, when you try to win a fight by knockout, you often end up losing a decision. What this means is that, when you just look for that one big shot to knock your opponent out, your activity usually lowers because you're not really setting that knock-up shot out. You're just headhunting, looking for that one big punch. And so you really see that in Maness. He only throws a very low volume of strikes. He's quite inactive on the feet, and he's always looking for that one big shot, which means it's quite easy to outpoint him. He just doesn't throw that much. So on the feet, Maness is a lot more dangerous than Nurmagomedov. Nurmagomedov is a very technical striker, moves very well, but he's much more of a volume striker, whereas Maness carries that one-shot KO power that can put you away. Nurmagomedov doesn't really have that. He fights in a nice sideways karate stance, uses a lot of long, rangy, leg kicks and body kicks to kind of chip away at you from a safe distance. Doesn't really engage too much with boxing. Nurmagomedov is one of these fighters that is a super strong grappler and kind of just uses his striking to kind of outpoint his opponents on the feet, but set up his takedowns and defend himself on the feet. So Nurmagomedov is very good defensively and moves very well, which will obviously make it difficult for Maness to land that big right hand. But because Nurmagomedov is very busy on the feet with his volume striking style, it will be very hard for Nurmagomedov. It will be very hard for Maness to outpoint Nurmagomedov because Maness is that big singular power puncher, whereas Nurmagomedov is much busier. Leg kicks, jabs, buzzes around his opponents and throws a high volume of strikes. So on the feet, perhaps Maness lands something big and knocks Nurmagomedov out. It's possible, but if he doesn't manage to achieve that, he's going to get outstruck by a pretty wide margin here because Nurmagomedov is very busy on the feet. But obviously, the Nurmagomedov name is famous for grappling, and that's really where Nurmagomedov shines. I think he is one of the best grapplers in the bantamweight division, and for this reason, it's a very difficult stylistic matchup for Maness. Now, Maness' takedown offense isn't bad. In actual fact, it's pretty good. But Nurmagomedov is very persistent with his grappling. His chain wrestling is very good. One of the issues with Maness is when you do take him down, he is very, very weak off his back. He's quite easy to hold down. So I do think Nurmagomedov may have a little bit of trouble getting this fight to the ground. But as soon as he does get the fight to the ground, it's going to be all Nurmagomedov because Maness doesn't do a particularly good job of defending himself. So from a betting point of view, this fight is a bit dead. Clearly Nurmagomedov is more likely to win. That's why he's a big favourite. And that's why we all lean towards him, right? Quite heavily. It's more than a lean. Bloody hell. Nurmagomedov should fucking win this fight this weekend. But obviously his advantages are baked into the odds. They carry an implied probability of 90%. And for all the reasons that I've explained in this breakdown video in terms of Maness' power and all the randomness of MMA, there's no way that you can bet Nurmagomedov here at these odds. Now, is this a dog or pass matchup? That is the question. Well, not for me, man. Not for me. At the end of the day, value doesn't pay the bills. I've tried to pay my mortgage in value in the past. The bank wouldn't accept value as a form of currency. So value betting needs to be done correctly, man. And from my experience, I've been doing this for 15 years. You can make a lot of money betting on big underdogs in MMA and capitalizing on the chaos and randomness of MMA. But in order to be profitable, you don't just want to throw fucking random. In order to make money with value betting, you need the underdog that you're betting on to have some advantages, to have a clear and obvious path to victory. This is why Taylor Santos was such an incredible bet a few weeks ago. We all bet Taylor Santos because we knew she had a path to victory. If she could use a grappling heavy game plan, she'd likely cause Valentina problems on the ground. When you look at Maness and Nurmagomedov, Maness doesn't really have any path to victory. He doesn't have any advantages over Nurmagomedov other than landing a big punch and knocking Nurmagomedov out. But with how tough the Nurmagomedovs are, how good Nurmagomedov is defensively, I mean, what probability would you give Maness of doing that? Not very high. And so, you know, value betting is a great way to make money in MMA. But you've got to pick your battles, man. You've got to choose your spots wisely. And Maness is not a spot I would be taking, even though obviously he is a massive underdog. You only need to hit a very high win rate to be profitable on bets in this odds range. But it's not for me. I'm going to pass on this one. And obviously Nurmagomedov wins this fight a very, very high percentage of the time. Now let's talk about the final fight that I want to talk about in this breakdown video. And if you like these breakdown videos, you appreciate them, please hit the like button below. Leave a comment, let me know what you think about these breakdowns, and also subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know what your bets are this weekend before we get into talking about one of the more interesting fights on this card, which is Chris Curtis against Rodolfo Vieira. Now, I apologize, I'm going to pronounce this guy's name wrong a ton. I keep calling him Rodolfo Vieira. I don't know why. In my breakdown video I did for this fight on my website, I kept calling him Vieira. So I do apologize if you get triggered. I'll try and correct myself if I notice it. But yeah, Rodolfo Vieira, Chris Curtis. Let's start off by taking a look at the odds on this one. So Chris Curtis is currently... there's a massive odds spread on Curtis's odds, where you can see green arrows across the board, you know, signaling that Curtis's odds are improving on most sites. Red arrows pointing down across the board on Vieira, indicating that his odds are declining. So I think where you see Curtis, you know, in this 1.6 odds range, I think these sites are just lagging behind these ones. And I think you're going to see Curtis's odds improve to that level on most sites. So rather than do average odds on this one, I'm going to put Curtis's odds in at 1.74, because that's the direction the overall odds are moving. And I think the laggards will catch up with the rest of the betting sites, and we'll see Curtis's odds in that range on most sites pretty soon. So Curtis 1.74 minus 135 for an implied probability of 57%. And if we take a look at the odds on his opponent Rodolfo Vieira, he's around an average of 2.20, which is going to be plus 120 for an implied probability of 45%. So from a betting point of view, this is the worst type of fight to bet on imaginable, because both these guys have extreme advantages in the area that the other is weak. And we'll be talking about these weaknesses in this breakdown, showing you a little bit of footage as well to back them up. But basically, Curtis is very strong in an area that Vieira is weak, and Vieira is very strong in an area that Curtis is weak. So for that reason, it doesn't matter which side you're on this weekend, doesn't matter who you lean towards, you're not going to be putting your money in a strong position, because whoever you lean towards, their opponent has the skill set to exploit a big weakness that they have. And so what you need to do is be very careful this week, listening to people that may, you know, be very confident in Curtis winning or very confident in Vieira winning. Because I promise you, man, with all my years of experience, go do your own research on this one. With all my years of experience, it doesn't matter who wins this fight. There's no strong position here. So if you hear someone say, oh, Curtis is a good bet this weekend, be very careful, man. I'm not saying Curtis won't win. You know, maybe Curtis does go on and win and they claim to be the smartest guy in the bar. But if Curtis does win this weekend, it'll just be because Vieira couldn't execute the strategy and his skill set, you know, capable of exploiting Curtis's weaknesses. And if you see someone really high on Vieira this weekend and he wins, they might talk like they're the smartest guy in the bar, but from a betting point of view, they probably didn't place a very good bet here, because there's no value on either side, with both these guys being deeply, deeply, deeply flawed. And we'll talk about why that is the case, you know, as we break these two down from a technical point of view. So Chris Curtis is 34 years old, 5'10", with a 75-inch reach. Rodolfo Vieira, 32 years old, 6 foot tall, with a 73-inch reach. So no notable, you know, X factors to focus on there. Both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size. Now Chris Curtis is predominantly a striker, and Rodolfo Vieira is obviously a grappler, one of the highest level black belts, one of the highest level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts that we've got in the UFC. But one thing that makes Vieira very unique is that his offensive wrestling is absolutely spectacular. He's relatively inexperienced in MMA with only 9 pro fights, which makes Vieira a little bit of an outlier, because what you usually see with these guys that come from a traditional Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background into MMA is that it takes them a long time to develop decent offensive wrestling. You know, we're seeing this with Mackenzie Dern at the moment. Going to the ground with Dern is an absolute death sentence. She's a phenomenal grappler and ultra high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, just like Rodolfo Vieira. But one of the things that's holding Mackenzie Dern back is that she just doesn't have the offensive wrestling to get her fights, to get her opponents to the ground. And so Dern struggles quite often to implement her grappling in fights just because she can't get her opponents down. Damian Maia was a guy that took a long time to develop offensive wrestling, and guys like Fabrizio Verdun went their whole career without really developing any offensive wrestling. What makes Rodolfo Vieira very unique is pretty much from day one he's been a very good offensive wrestler. Great double leg takedowns, great single leg takedowns, decent chain wrestling. The guy's an absolute nightmare, which makes him very, very formidable, because he's got the skills to take down most guys in the middleweight division. And if you go to the ground with him, again, he's got all the skills necessary to put you in a world of trouble. Whenever you're fighting Vieira, you want to treat the ground like lava, because this guy is a nightmare. Ultra high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, as good as it really gets in the UFC. We're blessed to have him in the promotion that we all love. So that's where Vieira will have a big advantage in this fight. If the fight goes to the ground, Curtis is going to be in a lot of trouble. So when we're breaking this fight down, the real question that we need to answer here is, what is the probability that Vieira can get this fight to the ground, and what happens when Vieira gets the fight to the ground, right? Is Curtis going to be able to stuff the takedowns? And if the fight does go to the ground, is Curtis going to be able to defend himself? That's the key question that we need to answer here, because we know if the fight stays standing, Curtis has got a big advantage. Rodolfo's got a huge advantage on the ground, but Curtis' advantage is just as big if the fight stays on the feet. So Curtis needs to treat the ground like lava here, and if the fight stays on the feet, he's likely to do very well. Vieira's striking, like a lot of grapplers, is simply to just avoid engaging. Vieira's striking is not bad, but it purely exists to defend himself on the feet and survive, defend himself on the feet and set up his takedown attempts. So Vieira doesn't like to engage too much on the feet because he doesn't want to exert any unnecessary energy. He knows that his path to victory is not on the feet, it's on the ground. So you see long periods of inactivity from Vieira on the feet where he doesn't do a lot. This is why Chris Curtis has such a huge advantage on the feet, because Curtis fights at a high pace. The guy is relentless, non-stop, action-packed, big drama show, aggressive, he's in your face, he pressures you. The guy is just relentless, and this is the exact style of striker that will cause Vieira big problems on the feet, because Rodolfo Vieira is one of these guys that needs to pace himself. He can't fight at a high pace for very long without gassing himself out bad. If you make Vieira work hard for just 3, 4, 5 minutes, he's going to get very, very tired. And that's why he has long periods of inactivity on the feet, where he's trying not to engage and he's trying to conserve as much energy as possible so he can save his energy up to grapple hard when he eventually decides to go to his grappling. Chris Curtis won't play that game. He's not going to respect Vieira. He's not going to give Vieira the time and space Vieira needs to pace himself. Curtis is going to get in Vieira's face, force him to work, force him to exchange for every single second that these guys are in the octagon, which means Curtis has got a big advantage if he can keep this fight in striking range, because he's going to be able to outstrike Vieira by a wide margin and break Vieira when he starts to slow down and gas out. But remember the question that we've got to answer in terms of, working out which side is the better side to be on here. Who is the better bet? We need to answer that question. Can Curtis keep the fight standing? And can he defend himself if the fight goes to the ground? So what's really unfortunate with Chris Curtis is that we haven't seen him fight a strong grappler for a long time. I always say that betting on MMA is a process of trying to make the best decision possible with the information we've got available. And quite often there are big gaps in information that makes it very difficult to predict the outcome of a fight with a high degree of conviction. That's one of the examples here, because if you look at Chris Curtis's record, over the last few years he just hasn't fought any strong grapplers. Brendan Allen didn't try to take him down, neither did Phil Hawes. Kenny Robertson's a striker. I don't know much about Jerome Hatch, but he's got a record of 25-14, so I'm guessing he's not good. Same goes for Juan Medina, 8-5. Carl Stewart is a grappler, but if you go back and watch this fight, it's available to watch online. You can see that Stewart didn't really commit that hard to the takedown, so we didn't get a good look at Chris Curtis's takedown offense in that fight. This guy's 20-10. Again, I'm guessing not great. Ray Cooper is obviously a striker, and so you've got to go all the way back to 2019 for the last time that we got a really good look at Chris Curtis's takedown offense and ground game, which is really unfortunate because a lot can change in a couple of years, right? It's been a long time since we saw Chris Curtis's takedown offense and ground game tested, and Chris Curtis could have improved a hell of a lot since we last saw him grapple back in 2019. So that's kind of the blind spot when we're breaking this fight down and researching it. We've got to form our opinion based on fights that took place back in 2019, which isn't ideal because fighters improve at such a rapid rate. You know, Chris Curtis has been training full-time with Sean Strickland in that time. We know Strickland is an amazing grappler himself. Iron sharpens iron. So being in the gym every day with a guy like Sean Strickland can see tremendous improvement, you know, in a short space of time for Curtis. But until we see that improvement, until we see Curtis's skills on display in the octagon, all we could do is make the best decision possible with the information we've got available and base our opinion, you know, based on base our prediction on what we have seen, because that's all we've got to work with. And what we have seen based on that fight that took place, you know, back in 2019 in PFL is that Chris Curtis has really bad takedown defense and he's exceptionally low level on the ground, which is really unfortunate. And I'm going to show you some footage here to kind of highlight what I mean. So here we go, very early on into the fight, and you can see Magomedov trying to tie Curtis up. Now initially we see, you know, Curtis doing most of the stuff that he should be doing. Magomed, I'm just going to call him Magomed, right? It's a bit of a tongue twister, his surname. So Magomed shoots a takedown. Straight away you see Curtis get his back up against the cage is the correct thing to do, so he can start to use the cage as base to defend the takedown. And then you see him digging underhook. So he's got a nice deep underhook on the left side and underhook on the right side. Then you see Curtis kind of make his first mistake. So Magomed transitions from that double leg to a single leg, and now for whatever reason Curtis has taken his underhooks out of position. So now he doesn't have any underhooks, which enables Magomed to kind of pick him up, go to the high crotch single leg and take him down. Now Curtis tries to create a little bit of space for himself for that armbar and scramble back up to his feet, but Magomed works his way out of it and quickly establishes top position straight into Curtis's guard. Now, we're only 40 seconds into this fight and Curtis just looks incredibly weak off his back. What you want to see a fighter do in this position is open their guard up, try and create some space off their back, try and get to their knees to pop back up to their feet. But you can see Curtis just looks very, very weak here. Doesn't instill confidence, doesn't make much of an effort to pop back up, and Magomed easily holds him down, even though there is quite a lot of space in there for Curtis to try and create scrambles to pop back up. Eventually Curtis does use his legs to create a little bit of space, but then we see, you know, the first kind of major red flags from Curtis's ground game. So whenever so I talk about this a lot in my live betting group when we live bet UFC events. Grappling positions are quite often a race where you're trying to get one step ahead of your opponent. Because if you can get ahead of your opponent in a position, they're then reacting to what you're doing and playing catch up. So the key to grappling is to move through positions as quickly as you can so that your opponent may struggle to keep up with the pace in which you're moving and you may start to get ahead of them in the positional battle. What you really don't want to see happen with an MMA fighter is for them to hesitate for long positions in bad positions. Because when they hesitate for long positions, it gives their opponent a lot of time and space to plan their next move and stay ahead of you. So where we've seen Curtis kind of sit up in this position is bad because his back is completely exposed here. And he's giving Magomed a lot of time, a lot of space to consider what his next move is going to be. Curtis doesn't have anything here. He's kind of got a loose grip on the right leg of Magomed, but nothing else. He's just sat on the floor, back fully exposed, and he's literally saying to Magomed, you make the next move because I don't know what I'm doing here. Inevitably, Magomed takes that invitation and he pivots to take Curtis's back. And this is where we see more mistakes from Curtis. So again, it's all about the speed in which you move. You don't want to hesitate in bad positions because then you enable your opponent to outpace you, stay a step ahead of you. Here, you cannot be stationary in this position because your back is fully exposed and you give Magomed the opportunity to start working for full back control, which is a worse position, much worse position to be in than this, because from here you can kind of roll out of position, scramble, explode over to the cage. You could try and break the body lock grip of Magomed and pop back up to your feet. There's a lot of things you can do to work out of this position. But if Magomed fully takes you back, locks in that body triangle, he can rack up a lot of control, and it's going to be very hard for you to escape that position. So you can't afford to hesitate here. You've got to move. You cannot hesitate. Curtis hesitates, and inevitably, look at this. Start to see Magomed work to take the back. He's trying to get hooks in, and look at how slow Curtis is here. He just doesn't do anything. He just stays turtled up, and look at how much space there is in there for Magomed to start slipping hooks in and working to take the back. Curtis just hesitates, and you can see, irrespective of how good Magomed Karimov is, Curtis just doesn't know what to do in this position. He's at a very low level. He's just confused. He doesn't have the knowledge of what he should be doing in positions like this. And as a result, inevitably, Magomed continues fishing for back control. And it's only a matter of time before he eventually drags Curtis back to the ground, gets 2 hooks in, and fully establishes back control. There you go. Look at Curtis hesitating here, man. Look how much space is in there for Magomed to get his hooks in play. Now, if there really is nothing Curtis can do here to work out of this position, say he's in a checkmate position, Magomed's grappling control's too strong and Curtis just can't shake him off. At the very least, you want to see a guy like Curtis keeping his arms and elbows tight to his thighs to take all this space away and make it harder for Magomed to dig his hooks in play, but he just doesn't do that. Look at how much space is in there, and Magomed just easily slips that second hook in on the right side. So Curtis just looks really, really, really low level here. Doesn't know what he's doing, and this could spell big trouble for him against Rodolfo Vieira, because the difference between Magomed Karimov's style of grappling and Rodolfo Vieira is that these combat sambo guys like Magomed Karimov, of course they'll attack with submissions every once in a while, but for the most part they're focused on position and control. They want to smother you in pressure, control you and wear you down. They want to wet blanket you and use their crushing grappling control to just smother you and keep you in bad positions where you can't hurt them. Rodolfo Vieira is completely different. High-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and he has fast offensive Jiu-Jitsu. Think about the likes of Mackenzie Dern on the ground or a Gilbert Burns. You make one mistake on the ground and they're going to jump all over you. And they're thinking 2, 3, 4 steps ahead. They're setting traps and hoping that you fall into them. And if you don't have a good understanding of the game they're playing, very easy for you to fall into those traps. So the problem when a guy like Chris Curtis competes against a guy like Rodolfo Vieira is that Vieira is very, very fast at capitalizing on bad positions. Where you've seen Magomed Karimov kind of methodically work through each of these positions and, slowly work from high crotch single leg to guard to body lock to back control. Where you see him kind of go through these positions is very slow, is very methodical. It's very technically sound and difficult to stop, but he's slowly working through this process, which means Curtis has got more thinking time to defend himself and protect himself on the ground. The problem with Vieira is that with how fast his jiu-jitsu is, he can capitalize on a mistake you make and jump on your arm, jump on your neck, jump on your leg, and have you tap in or choked out before you even know what's happened. It's a very different speed, and there's much less room for error against a guy like Rodolfo Vieira because, like I say, you make one mistake on the ground and he makes you pay for it. So this footage kind of shows Curtis very low level on the ground, bad takedown defense. I'm sensing extremely bad submission defense as well with how helpless he looks on the ground, which makes this an impossible fight from a betting point of view because, on one hand with Curtis, This guy's got a huge advantage on the feet, but you know, if the fight goes to the ground, he's totally screwed. But then with Rodolfo Vieira, you know, even though he's got this big advantage on the ground, if Curtis can keep this fight on the feet, or if Curtis can make Vieira work hard enough to gas out, then Vieira's in a lot of trouble. So it doesn't matter which side you lean towards here, you're putting your money in a lot of danger. And this is why I said at the beginning of the breakdown, be very careful who you listen to in regards to this fight, because there will be camps of people that will be very confident in Curtis. There will be camps of people very confident in Vieira. But ultimately, there's no strong position on this fight. Whoever you go with, you're going to be putting your money at a lot of risk. Personally, my lean is Curtis. And the reason why I lean towards Curtis is because Curtis is able to perform close to his full potential for the full 3 rounds. He's got great cardio, fights at a high pace, and we know Rodolfo Vieira is one of these guys that gasses out and slows down a lot as fights wear on. So I'd much rather go with a guy like Curtis that is capable of performing close to his full potential for 15 minutes than a guy like Vieira that can give you 3 or 4 minutes of hell before gassing out very bad and being, for the most part, pretty ineffective. So if Curtis can weather the early storm, survive on the ground, force Vieira to work, I think Curtis is going to take over and do really well later on in the fight when Vieira is likely to get very tired. But with how bad Curtis is on the ground, he may not get the opportunity to do that, because I think he's going to be very, very susceptible to Vieira's submission game. Having said that, we haven't seen Curtis's grappling since 2019. Training every day with Sean Strickland, it could have improved a lot since then. But all we can do is make the best decision possible with the information we've got available. And the information we've got available suggests Curtis is going to be in a lot of trouble if this fight hits the ground. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment. And don't forget to check out my website, MMABettingTips.com. Link is in the description below. If you like these breakdown videos for all the main card fights, you can catch breakdown videos just like this for all of these prelim matchups on my website. So go check them out. And yeah, hope you enjoy them. Hope you join the community. It would be great to see you in there. So thanks a lot for watching. Take care, guys. Have a great week, great weekend. Hope you crush it. Hope you make loads of money. I'll see you in next week's breakdown video, or maybe even one of the live streams for later on this week. Take care, guys. Bye.